All right, what's going on, boys and girls? So this particular video is one from a channel called Ask Leo. And the question is, he's trying to answer, attempting to answer is, should I switch to Linux from Windows? I was curious, caught my interest. I have no idea if this is going to be sound advice, bad advice, good advice. Find out. Could get the ulcer going. Lord knows after that last Upchurch video that I reacted to, that guy got my blood pressure, my ulcer, and about everything else wanting to. I think playing in traffic during rush hour in New York City would have been more fun.
Switch to Linux from Windows. Boy, this is one of those if I had a nickel questions. It comes up a lot, particularly after Windows 10 and the various news reports that people seem to be listening to about how it is or isn't actually behaving. Linux is positioned as an alternative. The real question here, though, is it right for you? Should you switch to Linux? Should I switch to Linux from Windows? Linux is a viable alternative to extend the life of older machines. We'll look at some of the issues involved if you switch to Linux. I'm Leo Notenboom. This is AskLeo.com. Thank you to the patrons of Ask Leo for making all of it possible. AskLeo.com/patron for more information and access to exclusive patron-only content.
Right off, it's great for extending the life of old machines. Go ask Dosky how well that's true. I have a few Ryzen systems kicking around that I'm pretty sure those are pretty new. I got a 8th gen i7 that's kicking around. I'm sure that's pretty new. And guess what? They all run Linux. Some iteration version. One of them, this particular machine is a older machine, but guess what? It's not that old because it can still kick everything else's ass, basically. I'm doing this on a 6-year-old EliteBook 8760W. The point is, it's not just old hardware. The technology people need to get, especially people like this need to get out of this mind frame that Linux is only for the server, Linux is only for the old hardware, Linux is only for this. Linux doesn't have a lane. That's kind of the point. Modularity is a thing. New, old, develop for, not develop for. Take your pick.
Question. I give up. Between Windows 8 and Windows 10 and Microsoft's privacy debacle, I'm done. What do you think if I convert to Linux, or am I wasting my time? What applications and utilities are compatible? For example, browsers, anti-spyware, virus protection, etc. How would you go about setting the computer up? I have moderate experience utilizing forums and sites like yours when encountering major problems. Linux is a great way to extend the life of older computers simply because many Linux distributions require fewer resources than Windows does. And lately, I'm hearing from people who, like you, are frustrated with Microsoft and Windows and are looking for something else. Linux isn't for everyone, but it can be a solid alternative.
That particular point I'll agree with. Linux is not going to be for everyone. Then again, neither is macOS or Windows. There's a viable solution for every person. It's just whether or not that person is willing to look for the viable solution. And that's really on the person, not anything else. Not the technology, anything else. It's on the person.
However, we need to set realistic expectations, and naturally, there are a few gotchas along the way. Linux distributions. One of the first concepts to understand about a switch to Linux is it's not just one operating system. It's many. In fact, the number of different Linux versions numbers well into the hundreds, and the vast majority of them are completely free. These different versions are often referred to as distributions, or distros for short. Each is based on a core version of the Linux guts, referred to as its kernel, but each differs in various ways and for various reasons. Some are targeted at low-end machines, others make really good web servers, and others are better for desktop usage. It's the latter I'll focus on here, recommending 2 distributions for general purpose use: Linux Mint, Ubuntu. Both of these allow you to choose between different user interfaces. Windows comes with whatever start menu and desktop it comes with, but with these distributions of Linux, you get to choose among several options. As we'll see shortly, you can experiment to see which you like best. For now, I'll recommend the one I often use on desktop machines, Linux Mint Cinnamon Edition. A switch to Linux Mint Cinnamon will probably be the most comfortable for those resisting the kinds of user interface changes that appeared in Windows 8 and 10. Linux expectations. Once we've selected a distribution, there are a couple of important expectations I want to set. Windows users often complain about how often updates happen and how long their current version of Windows is supported. In Linux, both these factors vary with the distribution you're using. Linux update free.
It's not just the distribution, like the distribution that you're using. It's also the version of the distribution you're using. Short-term releases for Ubuntu are 9 months, but yet an LTS is 5 years. Very big difference between the two. Fedora is basically a year. Then you have Tumbleweed, which is its own thing. You have Arch, which is always bleeding edge. Same with Gentoo. Slackware is a world of its own. The one thing I want to go back to, though, is you talked about all the distributions. Separate out all the noise to focus on like the core 7 that there are, like Gentoo, Slackware, Debian, brain forgets, Red Hat, Ubuntu. Like focus on like the core like 5 to 7 distros. It makes explaining each one that are based on those core distros a lot easier, because that'll cover about 90% of every distro that's out there. We're not talking Solus. We're not talking yada, yada, yada. Those are special cases.
Frequency. Different distros update at different rates. In fact, those rates can cascade in a fairly complex chain of events. Both Ubuntu and Mint, for example, are based on the Debian distribution of Linux. That means updates can be initiated from no fewer than 4 places: the Linux kernel, the Debian distribution, and the specific downstream distribution, Mint or Ubuntu, you're using, as well as any additional applications you have installed. Unlike Microsoft, most distributions don't batch their updates into a once-a-month cycle, but make them available as they're ready. My experience with Linux Mint is that updates appear frequently, as in perhaps multiple times per week. The good news is there's usually no harm in waiting a while, and should there be a critical update, it's made available as quickly as possible. Linux lifecycle. I'll be blunt. If you're complaining about Windows lifecycle, you don't know how good you have it. I know of no other popular operating system that is supported for as long as Windows. If you switch to Linux because of this, you'll be disappointed. Most Linux distributions fall into 2 classifications of release. Normal releases, typically supported for 2 years. LTS releases, standing for long-term support. LTS releases are generally supported for 5 years. In addition, while frequent releases are typically in-place upgrades, more major releases often don't have that as an option. You must reinstall the operating system from scratch in order to upgrade. The good news, however, is that unlike Windows, it's typically
No. I don't know about Mint because I haven't touched Mint since like 17.1. So it's been a while. Just so many levels of fucking no. Ubuntu can give you in-place upgrades. Arch is always up to date. If I'm not mistaken, I haven't done Fedora in a while, but I'm pretty sure there's an in-place upgrade to the next version. SUSE is always up to date. Like, no, there's so many levels of no. You don't have to nuke and pave. Most people tell you that nuke and pave is the better option. I digress and I disagree for typical end users. That's not the case. Those of us who distro hop and are more technologically inclined and don't mind reinstalling an OS like we we clean dirty dishes after a meal. Like it doesn't matter. But for the generic end user, no, you don't have to. Most distributions, like end user focused distros or rolling distros, are either always up to date or they have some type of in place update mechanism and automate the process for the most part. You can go from 1804 to 2004 when that rolls out. You can go from 1804 or 1904 to 1910. Again, I don't know about Mint. Not a fan of Mint. It's just personal. So if that's the case with Mint, well, hey, Mint, get your shit together.
Not nearly as risky to keep using an unsupported version long past its end of life. Linux. The same, only different. Most major concepts are common across Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. Files are files, folders are folders, and they all have a clipboard, and they all run similar applications. The devil, as they say, is in the details. Keystrokes may be different. Control Q instead of Alt F4 to exit a program, for example, or Control plus Insert to copy to the clipboard rather than Control plus C. Menu options may be different, and occasionally similar programs may behave differently.
Do note, most Alt F4 usually ends up closing most applications in Windows because, it became kind of a standard thing. Kind of like, Alt Tab runs through your open applications. Alt F4 is kind of a thing like that. Not for all, but, Control, Command Q or Control Q closes most applications, as does Alt F4.
Differently, perhaps making assumptions in one operating system that the other asks about instead. There are simply too many small differences at this detailed level to cover exhaustively. The good news here is that, as I said, the concepts are typically the same, and the differences often fall into the category of similar rather than radically different. Linux applications.
And I disagree, because the first motherfucker that switches from Windows, they're going to try downloading exe. Why doesn't this exe run? Because they haven't been explained or taught or shown that exes are not the default file format. These things have to be learned. They have to be taught. They have to be shown. They have to show what the equivalent is, this is where you're accurate. They're similar, but different. But you also have to understand that when it's different, it's different. It's not going to be what you expect. It's not like the approach to how you do and interact and handle things. Those nuances matter. You don't just go to the internet and download random not DMG files, dev files or whatever. Add random repositories. Most people will tell you, if it's in the repos, install it from the repositories. Install it from the App Center, the store, whatever you want to call it. So I kind of agree and disagree in the same lot.
The first place folks often run into trouble with a switch to Linux is application support. Windows applications will not run on Linux. You'll need to find a Linux version of the applications you care about in order to run them on Linux. These fall into three broad categories. Applications that are, in fact, the same. Many applications you may already be familiar with will have Linux versions. Examples include the Firefox web browser and the Thunderbird email client. Alternative applications. In many cases, there are alternatives to the applications you're familiar with. For example, OpenOffice or LibreOffice suite is available for Linux. While it's the same as the OpenOffice suite on Windows, it's only an alternative to the more common Microsoft Office on Windows. As an alternative, it's compatible to a point. Many, though not all, of the same features and functionality exist, though often in different ways. Even though they're compatible, documents may look different when exchanged between Microsoft Office and OpenOffice applications. This is a common experience across many of the alternative applications available for Linux. Once again, they're the same, only different. missing applications. There is no quick.
The same but different, but if you also have these applications available on the platform they are coming from as the substitution for the makes the underlying OS not fucking matter. This is something that people seem to miss a lot. All people care about is the tools to get their shit done. They don't give a shit about the pointy clicky crap. They just care about, can I use Audacity? Can I use Kdenlive? And if I can use it across all three, what do I care? Because basically, the interface and a little bit of the workflow might be different. But at the end of the day, they're the core applications that I know I need to use. So if you're switching anybody, or if the people are looking to switch, the best advice is not just jump on board. That's fucking stupid. The best advice is gradually switch. Give them the applications. Give them those alternatives. Give them those substitutions. Give them the ones that might work for them on their current platform so that they can migrate to the other platform. Because at the end of it all, it's the programs that they care about, not the OS. And do note, though, one other thing, people need to come to this kind of switching not so freely with this has to be like Windows, or this has to be like Mac OS. You have to understand, and you have to come to it with an open mind that is Android iOS? Is iOS Android? And if you know the answer to both of those is fucking no, then don't come to Linux, any distribution of it, expecting it to be the same from where the fuck you came from. This is like moving to a different state in a different city and expecting everything and everyone that you knew to be transplanted to where you fucking moved to. And the reality is, that's not going to happen, because that's not a real mindset.
Quicken or QuickBooks for Linux. You can't play World of Warcraft on Linux. Some applications have no.
You can't play World of Warcraft on Linux. Tell that to the simple install script that I do for Lutris. I downloaded an application and I tell it to install WoW. Woo! I'm pretty sure you can play WoW. You might want to update some of your info, homeboy.
Direct alternative available. Your only hope then might be to choose a different approach to the problem. For example, QuickBooks has an online offering if you're comfortable with that, or running Windows on another machine so you continue to use the Windows programs you need. When it comes to application support, it really boils down to what you need and how you use your computer. The great news here is that there are thousands and thousands of applications available, mostly for free. While there are anti-malware tools for
Okay, I knew this point was gonna fucking come up because it always does. Oh, they're free. They're free. No, fucking they are not. Developers put their time into it. Time is the one currency we don't fucking get back. So, if you're coming from Windows or Mac OS and you're used to paying for software, here's a brilliant idea. Donate to the fucking projects that you just downloaded. Essentially buy them. If you would spend $10 for OBS, give OBS $10. If you would pay $50 for LibreOffice or OnlyOffice or whatever application, take the same mentality, because these developers are giving the one currency they never get back: their time. And if you can't financially give, that's okay. Contribute to the communities. Help the communities. Do whatever it is you need to do to contribute back for the tools that they have given you to do what you need to do. I get so sick and tired of hearing this. It costs nothing. Cost is only one aspect of it, and people tend to forget that the other cost is time. And that currency, again, the developers never get. They never get back. So you have to decide, is their time investment worth your money, or is your own time a good substitution for money to give back? That is how we should be doing it. But we don't, because we got people like this that recommend it's free. Fucking hate that argument.
Linux, they're typically not as extensive and, to be honest, not as necessary as they are on Windows. Linux on the desktop simply isn't the target for malware that Windows is. Linux hardware support. The second place people run into problems with a switch to Linux is hardware support. More specifically, either advanced support or support for newer or more esoteric hardware. One problem with hardware support is rooted in device drivers and the terms of the Linux open source license. Technically, all software distributed with Linux is supposed to be open source, meaning anyone can view and in some cases even modify the software within certain limits. Hardware manufacturers resist this as it could expose proprietary features relating to their hardware. On top of that, hardware manufacturers don't often take the time to write device drivers for Linux, as it's such a small part of their overall market.
That's why AMD basically open sourced their entire driver stack. That's why Mesa is an Intel thing. Yeah, they're concerned. The one thing you're talking about is NVIDIA. I understand where he's coming from, but the broad generalized strokes you're painting it with this argument from and the caveats with are not helpful. It's too broad. You have to narrow down, be specific. Newer, like fresh, like Zen 3, 2, whatever, Zen 3, whatever the newest Zen, Ryzen stuff, the Ryzen 3rd gen stuff. AMD does terrible, even on Windows, when they launch new hardware. Windows, Mac, Linux, it's all garbage as far as the support out of the box. And that's the reality. Anybody who uses Ryzen will tell you that. However, once the support is there, it's damn good. On the flip side, Intel launches better as far as like when they have new hardware for the kernel. NVIDIA, their binary stuff, say what you want about it, does have the best performance out of the box when you install the drivers. The difference is AMD will give you the best performance out of the box without the drivers. It's just there. That magic thing of called it just works. That everybody aims for. This everybody says that Apple has nailed. Just saying. Like, really, your argument is the thing that bothers me the most. Like, God.
The result is that many drivers are basic, generic, or fail to take advantage of a device's full range of abilities in Linux. Sometimes there's no driver at all, so a particular piece of hardware simply doesn't work on Linux machines. The good news is the vast majority of hardware is either fully supported or supported well enough to keep most people satisfied. Linux user support.
So, Intel integrated GPUs work, CPUs work, AMD, open source GPU drivers, and open source anything with their CPUs. So there's two of them. The only one you're complaining about is NVIDIA. The only other people that have problems generically are going to be printers. And any Linux user will tell you one thing, and that's go buy a fucking HP. If you're going to get a printer, Go grab an HP because all their drivers are open source drivers and they work.
The final place folks run into trouble when they switch to Linux is when they run into trouble. Getting help for Linux issues is more difficult than for either Windows or Mac. There are two basic stumbling blocks. There are few equivalents to Ask Leo for Linux. I don't address it often since most of the people coming here are Windows users with Windows issues, so I'm able to help the greatest number of people by answering those types of questions. The result is that Linux isn't big on my radar. The same is true for the vast majority of technical support sites and forums on the internet. The forums and venues that do exist for Linux support have a reputation for being intimidating, geeky, and unfriendly to beginners. That's unfortunate, but I've visited enough places for solutions to my own Linux problems, and I've seen it often enough to note it here.
You can note it all you want, and part of that's true, but it's just as bad on macOS or Windows. And if you can't admit that, then you, my friend, are in denial. And I don't mean the fucking river in Egypt. Because really what it boils down to is if you are a power user, you will look down upon new users. Because you will see their question as petty, dumb, or ignorant. As opposed to, hey, this is what you're looking for. And do note, what's the one thing that everyone uses when they have Windows issues? Find a DLL. It's called Google or a search engine. DuckDuckGo, Bing, whatever search engine you decide to use. That's where 90% of people are going to look for help beyond anything else. That's before they'll register for any forum. That's before they'll register for X, Y, or Z. They're just looking for the answer. And that's all they care about. So your support thing is there somebody to call? Yeah. Go buy a System 76. Go buy a Dell. You'll get the same support that you would get on a Windows machine. Novel concept. So to me right now, this shows me as this is a Windows user looking at Linux with very basic intake of and experience in it. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm just saying from his broad strokes and generalizations, this is like argument shit that I heard like 15 years ago. Some of it's true still, even now, but it's a minority. And as far as if you want groups and places to go, BigDaddyLinux.com, DestinationLinux.network. Join their Discord. Join their Telegram. Join their discourse. You will find a welcoming community there, willing to help, from distro makers to advanced users, everyday users to newbies. The communities are there, just like they are in Windows, just like they are in macOS. But if you want to spread the same 15-year FUD, by all means. And you can talk about your experience. And trust me, I've had the experience of RTFM. For those that don't know what RTFM means, read the fucking manual. Or GTF... GTFG. Go to fucking Google. That is usually what most people expect for a response. And some people do give that. Not all of them, though.
The best advice I can offer is to be extremely clear in any questions you post and to read carefully and respond to any and all responses you get. More often than not, frustration is generated when the questions are vague and incomplete and when people provide answers that are apparently not even read. Giving Linux a try. It's really...
It's not even that. Here's the funny thing. You're talking about things that aren't being read, things that aren't being watched. I'm seeing a lot of that in this because All these are assumptions and broad generalizations, and quite honestly, not really helpful. Because I think you are a Windows Mac user or whatever, that you might have experience in Linux to an extent, but not enough to actually make solid content about it. I'm not going to call it ignorance. I'm just going to call it a lack of knowledge. Most people would expect me to be starting to yell and scream and no ulcer right now. Just it's another lack of experience, lack of usage.
Really easy to give Linux a try if you're considering Linux. I'd encourage you to do so. Most distributions are delivered in the form of a live CD or DVD or bootable USB image, which you can download from the website of the specific distribution you're interested in, such as Linux Mint or Ubuntu. Download and burn these to disk and then boot from that disk. Rather than running a setup program, a live CD will actually boot into a running, usable copy of Linux without modifying your hard drive or Windows. In fact, you can often use these live disks to recover files from your hard disk using Linux-based tools.
Please tell me you did not make the recommendation. If you made the recommendation of a live CD. If you want the closest to native performance, use a live USB, download Etcher and install the damn thing, download Rufus, download UNetbootin, and burn the ISO to a fucking thumb drive. Only use CDs and DVDs as a last resort because your performance will be terrible. You can still install from it, but it's going to take you a long time. USB, 20 minutes up and running, for the most part, unless you have some esoteric hardware or hardware issues, which does happen. Any Linux user who tells you that it's all roses and sunshine have their head buried in their own ass to avoid the sunshine part, because apparently they they don't want reality to be anywhere near them.
Play with Linux. Experiment a little. See what programs you like or don't like. See how it is different and whether or not you really care about those differences. 2 important things to note about running a live CD. Nothing will be saved unless you happen to use and save it to an online service. For example, reading your email on Outlook.com on the web should work and
Wow, so many levels of no. Persistence mode on a USB drive on Ubuntu-based distros, and I'm pretty sure you can do it on other distros too that do live USB, so you're wrong there. He's proving my point without me actually having to say anything. Like, this is just a person with a lack of current knowledge, and it's kind of depressing.
save just fine. It'll be slower than if it were installed on your system. Don't read too much into the performance you experience with a live CD. Switch to Linux. First, create a complete image backup of your existing Windows machine. I cannot stress that point enough. Back up your machine completely before you install Linux. The issue here is that switching from Windows to Linux is as big a change, if not bigger, as upgrading directly from Windows XP to Windows 10. There's a lot to learn and a lot to get used to. After using it for a while, you may very well decide that it doesn't meet your needs or it's just not your cup of tea. Maybe Windows wasn't so bad after all. Having that complete image backup of your machine means that reverting to what you had will not only be possible, but relatively easy. The bottom line, depending on your needs and your willingness to...
The backing up is a recommendation that you should always do. In fact, most people will tell you to have 3 backups. I don't know what else to say. Doesn't matter if you're switching OSs or you're staying on Windows or Mac or Linux or FreeBSD or Haiku or whatever OS you're on. Always have backups. If it's important to you, if the data is important to you, back it up. It's that simple.
To take a little time to learn a few different ways of doing things, Linux can be a very viable alternative to Windows and a cost-effective way to extend the life of an older PC. For links to relate.
Linux runs on a range of hardware, from the crappiest Chromebooks to the supercomputers that power the fucking computational nonsense in the world. Wow. I don't know what to say. This is just this. A lot of this is like 15-year-old information. Live CDs, live USBs, maybe, but like, fuck, you didn't even go DVD. I mean, Jesus Christ. The problem with this entire video is everything is just painted in broad strokes, and it's from obviously a user who is very Windows centric or Mac OS centric and has very limited personal experience and knowledge with Linux. And that's okay. I'm not going to shit all over this guy, but as far as the recommendations themselves in this video, it shows a lot of lack of knowledge. Just going to say, like, if you've used it, you would know a lot more about this, like you would know about persistence mode. You would know that there's I don't, like, I'm not dumbfounded. I'm speechless at how these videos get passed off as like knowledge. This is my knowledge. Your knowledge is very lacking. And that's all I can say. Might want to update some of it.